So, hello everybody, and welcome to the Data and AI Making the UK a World Leader in Emerging Technology panel at TechUK's Future Summit. We are thrilled to have you all with us, so thank you so much for being here. We have an amazing panel as well to discuss what is really, well, I'm biased, but one of the key topics as we look to move forward from the events of last year, and obviously the summit is looking to the future. So COVID and everything we experienced in the last 12 months, I don't know if people were at the beginning session today, but Anthony Walker, Tech UK's Deputy CEO, was reading out some of what was in the press headlines 12 months ago today, and it seems that we have come obviously a very long way. But the events of last year clearly showed how key emerging technologies, yes, data-driven technologies, artificial intelligence, but other technologies such as 3D printing, IoT and smart manufacturing really came into its own and helped keep us as a industry, as an economy, as a society, digitally keeping us going while we're physically apart. And now as we have kind of, I suppose, the events of last year demonstrated the power of these technologies and what they can really do if we embrace them and use them. We're now obviously, as we look to rebuilding, recovering, reinvention, as organizations look at how they can ensure resiliency in their operations and supply chains going forward, if this were to ever happen again, how can these technologies really play a key role, and what role do they have to play as we move forward, as we look to recover and rebuild? So this session really is going to look at a little bit of kind of where are we today? Perhaps what have we learned from last year? What have we seen? How do we, if adoption and deployment of data, AI, and other emerging technologies is really going to hold a key to moving forward, how do we encourage greater adoption and take up? How do we make the business case for greater adoption and take up? And also, I think a really good topic is thinking about where we are right now, and does the UK have all the kind of key ingredients it needs to achieve this and to move more forward? Or what are some of the challenges? What are some of the barriers that still stand in our way? You know, there are still challenges and barriers, legacy issues that existed before COVID that still exist today. So how do we really perhaps move forward and make progress on those issues as we look ahead? So we have only 45 minutes, so that's enough from me. I don't think I even introduced myself because I feel like I already know you all already. So I'm Sue Daly, I'm Associate Director for Technology and Innovation at Tech UK. But I have an amazing panel here who for you to listen to, and also for you to ask questions. If you'd like to ask questions during the session, please do so using the chat function. And what I'll do is, after we've heard from our three speakers, is I'll look to ask them some questions from my side, but also I'll look to bring in questions as well. So please do feel free to add them in the chat and I'll keep an eye on them. But before we get to some questions, let's kick off and let's hear from our panel as well in terms of their view of this issue, their view of the potential, the opportunities of emerging technologies in the UK, and how do we get this right? How do we move forward? Sean, I'd love to start with you, Sean Collins from Pure Storage, who's supporting this session. So thank you, Pure Storage, and thank you, Sean, for all your help with this. Perhaps introduce yourself, and then I'd love to get your viewpoint to kick us off, really, for this discussion. Thank you.
Sure. Okay. Thank you, Sue, and good morning, everyone. As you said, Sue, I'm Sean Collins. I head the public sector business at Pure Storage in the UK. And it's really good to be here with you today. This is a really important topic. For me, I just want to say that data really sits at the heart, I guess, of enabling improved outcomes in all manner of areas of government and indeed industry. And for me, decisions, analytics, AI all depend on that data. The data is at the heart of it. And I guess so for me, it's really important that if we're going to really unlock the potential of AI and other technologies like this that are so dependent upon data to improve decisions, improve citizen services, etc., that we really do strengthen the foundation for change. So I think it's a good debate to be having about, you know, how do we ensure that we've got all the foundation stones we need to really exploit this potential. Thank you.
That's great, Sean, and thank you so much for kicking us off. I'm sure we'll get to what some of those foundations are, and also how do we encourage people who are not perhaps on that road and on that journey to join us all. So more to come. Thank you, Sean. So I'll go to Sana Kurugani, who is from the Office for Artificial Intelligence. Sana, great to have you with us. Perhaps just introduce yourself to people that don't know you, and then would love to hear from your perspective of where you think we are. Obviously, the Office has been published recently its AI roadmap for the UK, so I'd love to hear a little bit more about where you think we should be heading.
Thanks, Sue. Yes, so first of all, thank you very much, Tech UK, for this amazing panel. Really honored to be on this with Lord Tim Clement-Jones and Sean Collins. So thank you very much for inviting us to be here. As you said, I'm Sana Kurugani. I head up the Office for Artificial Intelligence. And I wanted to talk a little bit about what we've done over the last few years and where I think we're going. And I'm just excited right now to be thinking about the future because much like everyone else, I want to think about how we build back better from where we are and what have, what are some of the potentially positive consequences of what we've all endured. So the Office for AI was set up in 2018 in response to an independent AI review. Initially, we came about to implement the recommendations of the review through the commitments that were made in the near £1 billion sector deal that was outlining programs around data, skills, and adoption. So very much the enablers for the AI industry to grow and prosper. We've been super busy over the last few years. Many of the programs we've delivered people on this call will already know about. So I'm just going to canter through a few of them that I think are worth highlighting. So we've explored data trust with the Open Data Institute and Innovate UK. We've worked to attract and retain top talent through introducing more PhDs via the 16 new Centres for Doctoral Training with UKRI and the Turing AI Fellowships. We've introduced many more master's students via the industry-funded master's program. Some of those sponsors are here on the call today. We have funded 2,000 conversion courses at master's level to allow people from non-STEM backgrounds to switch to AI coursework. This includes 1,000 scholarships for underrepresented students and people from underrepresented groups. We've published guidelines on using AI and on AI procurement to inform and empower buyers from across the public sector, helping them to evaluate suppliers and then confidently and responsibly procure AI technologies for the benefit of citizens. So a lot of these kind of barriers that we've seen, we've tried to address via various kind of methods. We have supported colleagues across Whitehall departments from the Intellectual Property Office to launching a new AI procurement marketplace to allow kind of SMEs to enter the system and contributing to a suite of AI related guidelines and frameworks, some of which are coming out very soon. So watch this space. And I think last but not least in this list, I wanted to say that we've been piling up on our virtual air miles over the last year through lots of international work. So this includes engaging with the OECD, with the World Economic Forum, and now with being one of the founding members of the Global Partnership on AI, which is the first multilateral organization that's tasked with forming international agreements on norms around AI. That's just a short sample of what we've achieved over the last few years, but I only had a few minutes, so so excuse me for that, and excuse me if I've missed any projects that we've done together with people in this event. Of course, I have to mention that we've also set up an AI council. This is an independent advisory group of 22 people from industry, academia, and civil society. Among the many things that the council has been up to, and this includes providing advice to government through the COVID pandemic, to which they were incredibly instrumental. They have just published, as Sue said, an AI roadmap. So this roadmap outlines 16 recommendations to ensure that AI continues to prosper in the UK. There are two overarching messages in this. First is to double down on existing investments that were made following the AI sector deal. And the second is to ensure that support for AI reflects the rapid pace of disruption that these technologies provide. This really means integrating approaches to ethics, security, and social impact alongside science and planning for the next 10 to 50 years. The Council's recommendations sit under 4 pillars. There's research, development, and innovation, skills and diversity, data, infrastructure, and public trust. And finally, in the final section, they're addressing some specific measures to support adoption of AI technologies in key sectors such as health, climate, and defense. So as a government, we are now considering these recommendations and engaging with the broader ecosystem, of which every single one of you is a member, to work on what the next chapter for the UK's AI journey entail, and what we should be concentrating on and how we prioritize these activities. So if you haven't read those, please do go and read them, and do reach out, and you will see a number of sessions running over the next little while, so please do get involved. And I'll stop there and hand over to Tim.
Thank you, Sana. It's feels like an extremely exciting time in this area, because we're not at the start, right? There's so much activity that has happened. And I think, Tim, particularly since, the House of Lords AI Select Committee report that you chaired, Ready, Willing and Able, a couple of years ago now, I know you've just updated that report with looking at where the UK is. So I'd love to get your perspectives on this, but we're not at the start, right, in terms of, data-driven technologies, as Sean talks about, unlocking the power of data, and we perhaps talk about that. We had the National Data Strategy consultation last year, at the end of last year. We've had all this work that's been generated through the AI sector deal, and the Sana and her team are doing. So we're in a good place, right? We're in a place where there's lots of activity, but now we need to think about what we need to do moving forward, right? Love to get your view.
Absolutely, Sue. And it's always a huge pleasure to listen to Sana and the sheer, ambition and, enthusiasm of the way forward. And of course, as chair of the co-chair of the All-Party Group on AI, and as former chair of the AI Select Committee, I take an enormous interest in what is happening, what we want to see happen, and so on. And the job of a select committee is to kick the tires of government policy and say, are we moving fast enough? So we're always a bit impatient, but it's probably a good thing, because it helps propel things forward. And, the latest report is no exception to that. We did a report, as people may remember, back in 2018 called AI in the UK, Ready, Willing and Able, which was a special inquiry. And we followed up on that in a very new procedure just recently with a report in December. We weren't wholly convinced that actually all the momentum that we generated and we noticed way back, starting with the whole Percenti review, which was, a really fantastic piece of work. So we called it AI in the UK, no room for complacency. So, we sort of issued a little bit of a warning that we mustn't slow down. And, we celebrated the enormous investment in AI, which has taken place over the last 5 years. But we did say that there were some issues that we really, needed to look at. And I think, we'll come on to this later, but some of the, the COVID issues in terms of data, in terms of some of our experience with algorithms and so on and so forth, in education, Home Office and so on, there are some warnings there about public trust and data governance, basically. We can't just expect the general public just to absorb information about how data is being used. It's much more serious than that. And we've got to have, a proper program of public education, digital literacy and so on. I know there are some proposals coming down the track, but it's really important that government takes that role. And, we've got some great institutions, Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation, the AI Council, not least Sana's office as well, which can all contribute to that. But I think that probably, the key institutional issue where we had we were really ahead of the game was on things like data trusts. And I don't don't think we've really yet built on that properly. And it's interesting that the AI Council are dedicated to making sure that that moves forward too, because that was a whole Percenti review recommendation. I think we now call them social data foundations, but we've got to keep moving, because it's really important to keep that public trust in how their data is used. And there's a lot of confusion in trade agreements and so on and so forth. Secondly, code of ethics. We recommended this overarching code of ethics. It's got to be operationalized now. It's all very well to sign up to the OECD and the G20 and some very highfalutin international aspects, and even the GPAI. But what we've now got to do is get down to the regulatory risk issues, the standards that you expect in procurement, the standards you expect in design and development. And we recommended that we really get stuck into that as well. And the other aspect we talked about was in terms of our regulators. We've got world-leading regulators. It's rather odd, isn't it, to think of world-leading regulators, but we have the ICO, we have the Competition and Markets Authority, we have the Financial Conduct Authority, and they all actually are doing some good things in regulatory terms. But what they don't have is a really very clear idea of sectoral risk in terms of application of AI. And what is very interesting, when we recommended that there should be a much, much closer attention to that. And what's interesting is that the Digital Regulation Cooperation Forum is now taking that on board and is starting to do quite a lot of work on risk. But it's sectoral. It's not some, one size fits all cross-sectoral approach. But of course, there's a lot of international work going on in risk calibration in AI, in the Council of Europe, in the OECD, and the EU, of course. So a lot going on there. Skills and upskilling. I mean, frankly, the AI Council is absolutely on the case on this. And, that whole diversity and inclusion, digital literacy aspect, the government skills paper is not adequate for our purposes. We need to be much more ambitious with lifelong learning accounts and so on, because it's not just about the AI workforce, it's also about the impact of AI on employment and so on. And then finally, to bring it all together, and I'm sure Sana will be horrified by the idea of this, it's this a cabinet committee, because it's a very, very disparate universe that we have. We're in danger of having such good institutions that we haven't got them all being coordinated in a national AI strategy. And of course, the AI Council also recommended a national AI strategy, which is excellent. But we've got absolutely Premier League people, the AI Council, Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation, Ada Lovelace, Alan Turing, Open Data Institute. We've got all the catapults. We've got some really good catapults which need to be used more. And a cabinet committee would really bring all that together, in my view. We've got to have top level coordination, because otherwise, we're not going to get all the resource in the right places. We're not going to be able to take an overview of the kind of regulatory answers that we need in some high risk cases. And we're not going to go forward at the pace we want to. So that is a very quick summary of the conclusions we came to.
Thank you, Tim. Amazing as always. And I loved your phrase of we have to keep the momentum going. So yeah, Sean, I was going to come to you and just maybe respond to Tim, but also in terms of that kind of sector issue. Is that where you we need to focus?
Tim and Sana make absolutely valid points, and it's also interesting, as well as obviously the excellent informative report and roadmap from the AI Council. When I read UKRI's own paper on transforming our world with AI, it exposes an interesting, let's call it, gap. So whilst it says, the UK is probably the third in the world in terms of our R&D and our thinking around AI, it's interesting that then we're the 11th in terms of actually being able to utilize and get the real impact from those changes. So there's obviously a gap there, and I think it's important that we are able in the UK to be able to close that gap and ensure that AI, through all of these great plans, is starting to really deliver, as other technologies are, really deliver some improvements and some outcomes. And certainly, you know, we conducted a report at Pure Storage across about 500 leaders of business and AI across Europe, just to see their thinking around you know, challenges, inhibitors, that sort of thing. And we called it a stress-tested public sector. And people are quite free to download it if they wish. I think it's on your Tech UK website. One of the things that really threw out and highlighted is a huge number of individuals saying that their own progress on some of these great initiatives, some 68% said, you know, it was being inhibited by some of the legacy architectures of data that they've got and some of the legacy infrastructure. So I think it's really important that we continue to remember that whilst we will have great plans and great ambitions, we must address some of that legacy. Otherwise, progress will be inhibited, Sue.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something that it keeps coming back in my conversations I'm having across not just data and AI, but also other technologies like cloud computing, that the legacy issues, the challenges that people were facing before COVID, they haven't gone away, right? They're still there. We still need to, as we move forward, I can completely agree, at pace, and we need to keep that momentum going. How do we make sure that we're also, as some people, and Paul Maltby is very, says a lot, fix the plumbing. How do we make sure we get that right as well? But Sean, I'm just interested in that kind of, okay, if we need to keep the momentum going, we need to look at perhaps where the opportunities are, where data, AI technologies, emerging technologies can really benefit. Are there particular sectors or industries, and as Tim mentioned, that there are, you know, sectoral risks, are there sectors and industries which you think should be priorities?
Yes, Tim mentioned some, Sana mentioned some. I mean, for me, obviously, and reflecting on the last, you know, almost year since March, when our own lockdown happened, I think healthcare particularly is an area that could really benefit from better application of data analytics, AI, to better inform clinician decisions, to be more predictive around you know, treatments that ought to be made for patients, not just with COVID, but obviously other critical illnesses. So I think healthcare, certainly also for me, education sector. You know, I think again, my daughter is embarking on an online MBA type course, and the way in which she studies, it's quite clever that it tells her things that she's missing out on that she should be doing more of. So I think more application into education as well would help. And I think if we do these things, it will help to engender, as Tim said, trust. It's really important that we get trust. And, you know, from the report that Sana referred to as well, getting public's trust in the fact that their data will be utilized to deliver something better to them is all part and parcel of helping people to embrace change, because they see a benefit in it for them. So for me, certainly healthcare, education, certainly, and obviously areas like, you know, defense, et cetera, but those two areas particularly for me are key.
Thanks, Sean. Sana, I'd love to come back to you, because Sean's absolutely right in terms of getting some of those you know, good news stories, those great examples, those best practices of where these technologies can really make a difference. It's not the silver bullet to trust, of course, and I'm sure we'll come on to, there's lots of other issues around building trust and confidence in emerging technologies that we have to get right. But that's part of it, right, is talking about the potential, what these technologies mean. I'm interested in, and I'd love to hear Tim's view as well, but looking back, before we kind of look ahead, what are some of the kind of, are there examples that you've seen of where these technologies have really made a difference in the year that we've just had, that we should be talking about more, that showcasing to really get people more excited and perhaps thinking about, wow, these have really made a difference? I would have loved that kind of use of AI when I was doing my master's. Believe me, that would have really helped me. But love to hear, what would you highlight?
Yeah, I mean, so Sue, I love that you came to me on this, because I'm a kind of perennially optimistic person, and I always try and look at things from, you know, what's the good that's come out of this, right? There's been loads of reports actually following the pandemic in terms of the growth in digitalization and digital transformation, right? So McKinsey just came out with something that said that actually COVID-19 has accelerated digital transformation by 5 years in the UK. which is incredible, right? So this is basically people saying, here's these legacy issues, these legacy blockers that stops transformation, one of which we haven't named yet, which is just cultural, right? Just aversion to change. And some people have just had to push beyond that because there is pressures that they cannot control, right? So huge leaps in the last 12 months. And ultimately, work hasn't stopped going in any of these things, right? So just, I mean, a couple of examples worth mentioning. A lot of this people will know. AlphaFold from DeepMind is a big one, right? That's a huge 50-year-old protein challenge that we now have a solution for. And we continue to get better at doing using kind of artificial intelligence. The NHS AI Lab, which was created in 2019. They've created something called the National COVID-19 Chest Imaging Database, which has now 20 national trusts, NHS trusts that are part of it, and it includes 42,500 images. So it's the biggest image sharing database now in the UK. And it's now being used by researchers and clinicians in Addenbrooke's Hospital in Cambridge to understand and diagnose people that are presenting with COVID-19. So, I mean, these are like specific technologies and data that is being used to help the immediate situation, right? I've just said a couple of things like this. This is during mid-pandemic, so uptake since September 2020 of our conversion courses that I mentioned, 40% of the total students that are enrolled on the artificial intelligence and data science courses in England are women, and 25% of them are Black students, and 15% of them are disabled. I mean, this is brilliant. Like, this was exactly the kind of, and this happened mid-pandemic, right? 76% of the people who got scholarships are women, and nearly half of those, 45%, are from Black and underrepresented backgrounds, and 24% are disabled or self-identify as disabled. So, I mean, I think there's some real benefits, and some of this, you know, we would have expected these numbers to even be higher, but if we assume that in the middle of the pandemic, when all of the courses moved from being in person to online, we still had uptake with the numbers that I'm kind of suggesting and dating. The other, just one quick other point to make here. Tim's absolutely right. You know, the work on that we started with the ODI. Well, actually, we may have stepped away from it from government, but that work didn't stop. So the ODI themselves have continued to take forward their data institutions work streams. And the AI Council has started looking very, very closely at the legal mechanisms to data trust so that they can create repeatable situations, repeatable instances for businesses. And organizations like the Food Standards Agency that are working with Internet of Food things, because that rolls off the tongue, right? They have a project with the University of Lincoln, and they have created a repeatable framework for data trusts in all manners of data sharing across the food sector. So there's definitely work, and I think just to say, you know, I totally agree with him in the push and the not losing of momentum. And I just want to reiterate that government plays one part in that. That this is an ecosystem of groups that need to come together, right? And whilst government has investment, can offer investment and opportunities, can offer convening powers, etc., there is a lot in here that industry, civil society, and academia, and that kind of, those groups coming together need to do in order to make all this happen.
Thanks, Sana.
Yes.
And I'd love to come back to Tim. Looking at, well, first of all, if there's an example or something that you saw in the last 12 months, Tim, that you were kind of like, wow, this really, you know, kind of proves the business case, because I'm sure, and I'd love to come on to you next in terms of, you know, we do need to, if we're going to get more organizations to adopt and deploy these technologies, have we built the right business case? Have we proven the business case for business leaders? But Tim, just before we go on to that, to Sana's point as well, you mentioned all the amazing things and all institutions we have. I would add Tech UK into that, of course, but
Of course.
that's my job, right? Because probably my boss is watching right now. But in addition, you know, coordination, yes, and I understand that point. But is there what do we have everything that we need? Are you saying we have the ingredients we need? We just need to work more together. Or is there something missing? So is there an example of something you would highlight from last year, and also moving forward? Is there something that is missing that perhaps we need to implement or we need to create?
Yes, I think there is. I mean, you can't. You've got to have confidence in your procurement. You know, because by and large, the people who are going to apply AI are not the people who are designing and developing it. So, you know, if I'm, say, for instance, a deputy head of a school, and you know, the last year has given me a real interest in technology and sort of opened my eyes to, you know, what the potential is in terms of using you know, AI systems that have a greater personalization of the education. And you know, and I chair an institute for ethical AI in education, so I've got a bit of, you know, skin in the game here. It's really important that as that deputy head, you know what kind of standards you should be adhering to in terms of transparency, in terms of data use, in terms of, you know, all the other sort of use cases that are valid. It's really important that they have a roadmap to do that. You know, we call it an ethical framework, but you know, you can describe it as a procurement set of guidelines or whatever. But it's really important, and that's why the WEF guidelines that government adopted for government departments was so important, because it does give a framework for civil servants to do that. You can't necessarily say that they're going to do it, but they do have the wherewithal to judge whether or not an AI solution, you know, fits the bill, basically. So, but you know, what we've got to do is take advantage of the fact that over the last year, the culture has changed hugely. And you know, I think the professions were pretty much on the way to using, you know, they're always first up because they're basically regard themselves as a scarce resource. So anything they can do with sort of natural language processing or whatever it may be, or data organization, the accountants are really getting big on the sort of organization of their data for audit purposes. But, you know, I think most of us like to think of the social purpose of AI. And the thing that absolutely struck me is, well, I wonder, how are we assessing the genomics of these new variants? You know, there's an awful lot of, you know, very new and exciting technology going on, because the speed at which we're now able to assess those new variants is quite extraordinary. And you can only do that, I think, by AI forms of machine learning. And also, you know, I think the whole GPT-3 aspect it's got a scary side of it. You know, the fact that you can see an article in The Guardian written by GPT-3, but nevertheless, the possibilities of GPT-3 in terms of that natural language processing is extraordinary, and it gets more and more powerful in the same way that, for instance, the Google Translate function is just, you know, dramatically different. You know, I don't have to speak French anymore. I can just get a letter translated, and it's, you know, compared to 5 years ago, it's quite extraordinary, really. So, you know, a lot of things, but we do have to make sure that people have confidence, that there is trust, and there's a kind of ethical understanding and framework. Because, you know, I keep saying, well, first of all, I always quote John McCarthy saying, as soon as it works, nobody calls it AI anymore. So the danger is that you just institute these things and then it's all opaque under the surface and nobody knows what's going on. And the second is that, you know, it's really important that we don't lose trust like we did in GM Foods in these new technologies.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we have an interesting question in the chat following Sana, your point about the COVID database. I think for the I was about to say the lungs. Let's say the lungs. About, you know, that happened quite quickly and quite rapidly. How can we therefore perhaps take that advantage? How do we enable other kinds of work and other diseases to use these technologies in the same way? Perhaps we can come on to that in a minute. But Sean, I'd love to come to you. Tim, Lord Clement Jones is talking about a roadmap and a framework. I'm thinking in terms of how do we therefore get organizations, get businesses to really, how do we make the case? How do we get leaders to adopt and deploy and use these technologies data?
Indeed.
Do they need a roadmap? Do they need a framework? What's the key here, Sean?
So big hobby horse of mine, this. So Tim and Sana have said things there which absolutely resonate. So you talked about business cases earlier. Given my long career in public sector, I remember many instances of IT system failures, big press headlines. It's really important that we get both the business operations side and the guys who own the technology side talking to ensure that we really do understand what the requirement is for change and the technologies that are required in terms of data management, data storage, data architecture, etc., etc. Because otherwise there will be a problem. And that problem will be that there will be this great expectation that technology is going to bring all these benefits. And then because the requirement for the business wasn't clearly specified, there are folk who have found, feel as if it's left wanting. So for me, the business case creation is key. And that sort of then touches on a word that Tim used, which is procurement. Procurement can only do what it's meant to do properly and efficiently if the requirement for the business is clear, and that a clear requirement is laid out for different organizations to respond to. So I think, yes, there needs to be greater clarity over how those business cases for change are built, particularly around some of these emerging technologies like IA. Now, number two, I think also we mustn't forget, again, that reflecting on what do we need in an operation or a government department or an agency around skills, around the data architecture itself, around the legacy systems and infrastructures that will all support these programs of change and transformation. Like Sana, I'm a big optimist. I think that there is huge potential here, but it's really important that, as I said at the start, we get some of those foundation stones right.
Absolutely. And I love an optimistic panel. This is great. Just what we need right now. Just what we need. But Sean, you made a good point. I don't want to kind of come to the end of our time on a kind of challenge, but we have to face it right. As you say, the foundations we have to get right. There are challenges, there are issues that are still out there that may be preventing us from realizing this full potential. So perhaps start with you. You mentioned skills, Sean. Is that on the top of your mind, the top of your list in terms of an issue that we still have to get right? And I'd be interested, particularly from your point of view, given all the great work that Sana and the Office for AI have been doing around conversion courses, is that enough, or is there more we need to be doing? Is it not just, is it the AI industry, is it broader society we need to get digital skills right?
Yeah, it's a digital skills, yes, but also with data, with more use of data comes sometimes, to Sana's point around culture, becomes fear and risk. So we have to address some citizens' genuine concerns around the way that their data is being utilized. We must certainly address some of the very real threats that are out there around that data being impacted by things like ransomware attack. So we've got to address the data risk issue. We've got to address the issue that citizens may have around the fear around the way that their data is being utilized. So these are key things for me. Yes, skills are there. I think also encouraging greater adoption. You'll have some big government agencies, big enterprises that are doing their own work around this, but you've got a smaller business in the UK who also want to utilize some of these emerging technologies, but somehow, they haven't necessarily got the balance sheets to be able to do that. So I think we also need to encourage them, because the way it's all part of the education and learning to be able to encourage and support those smaller organizations to embrace this sort of emerging technology for the benefit of their own customers, that will help to spread the word. So I think this is a really important area of support, of communication. Communication sits at the heart of any change program. People first, then process, then technology. Technology in itself is not the be all and end all here. We've got to get the cultural side right. We've got to get communications right. The technology will obviously enable everything behind that, but let's get those two aspects.
Yeah. When I say that, representing the tech industry, people normally go, what? But absolutely agree. It's the three, it has to work together. Sana, love to come back to you in terms of, would you agree? Is digital skills still the kind of top issue that we need to get right, or what else would be on your list if you had a magic wand and say, right, we're gonna fix this one challenge or this one issue that is really, standing in our way? What would it be?
Does it have to be one, or can I pick a bucket? Then we can put more.
As it's you, I'll allow a few more. But go ahead.
Look, I think we've already talked about it, right? Like things have moved and progressed, but they haven't. We're not done, right? But and if we keep getting it right, then what we'll get is a different problem along that same spectrum, right? So the enablers are still important, and the enablers are infrastructure, data, skills, right? And those three things, yes, we've made progress along them, but we need to keep moving, right? So I'll give you an example, right? We've done a whole bunch of stuff on the top end of skills, right? PhD, masters, fellowships, and we've increased the supply to be a little bit more, congruent to the demand that we see in the marketplace. We can't stop that, right? Just like the AI Council has asked, we need to double down on the things that we've been doing. But we also now need to listen, right? Because what's happening now is that the ask is not for developers, not for somebody with deep knowledge in AI, but actually it's for project managers and product managers and for some of these other things to allow for some of the things Sean was talking about, right? Now the companies are saying, right, now I have the scientists, I understand what I need to do. Now I need to get on with the doing. So actually their ask has changed, but it's still enablers to get this thing going, right? So I think there's something to say in here about, continuously listening to the ecosystem, keeping those the opportunity to share information open, which is why we have the AI Council to be that conduit for the system, for the ecosystem, between the ecosystem and government, right? So we can create policies that actually fix real challenges, right? So we're creating data-driven policy making, right? And that's the thing we need to continue to do. So I guess I've evaded your question to pick a thing by saying the whole set of enablers, but I do think that it's slightly different versions of those same enablers.
Yeah, no, I will allow it. It's a fair answer, and I think most important thing I take from that, and where Tech UK I think can help, is that keep listening. So how can we do that? Because we do have the people at the cutting edge of developing AI, and it is changing. It's a rapidly changing technology, more so than I've ever seen in all my time in tech. So how can we keep talking? How can we keep listening, but us keep talking? So absolutely,
with you guys and with others in the ecosystem that allow us to hear what people are saying. So
yeah,
thank you very much.
And Sue, listening is part and parcel of communications, right? So at a time when we're always hearing, if you like, bad news, it's really important that folks start to hear some good, positive news. And I think that if we can start to communicate some of the benefits that are already being realized from work that the AI Council is doing, from work that other organizations are doing around AI and other emerging technologies, by better utilizing data, I think it just helps with that whole cultural embracing of future change. I think the communication side, sorry to bang on about it, but I think it's really, really important.
No, I completely agree. And in that way, it's translating those great examples and case studies, as you've all done already, into what it means to people's lives, right? It's what what it means to the economy and what it means to productivity, huge potential. But at the end of the day, Tim, if we're going to bring people on this journey, it's fixing some of the plumbing, fixing the things that maybe we still need to fix. But then it's translating that into what it means to people's lives, right? Would you agree?
High and low, really interesting. I had an interview with a rather sophisticated AI about 2 weeks ago, and it made me think that actually it's the humans actually that need fixing at the moment. We need to understand how to relate to the use of AI. It requires a mindset and what they're for. You know, in a sense, we have to give them value and purpose. And when you're a board director, for instance, and you do not understand AI, you're doing no favors to anybody, because you don't know whether it's going to substitute for people in your workforce, or it's going to augment what they do, improve what they do, you know, help them do what they do. And, you know, so that's the big board director. When you go down to the SME, you know, which we talked about earlier, I think Sean and Sana talked about them. I mean, there is a big issue there in terms of adoption. What we need is a mechanism. We need to get the catapults really geared up to help them move on. You know, you talk to all the people like SAP and so on, and there's still frustration that not enough is being done there. And, you know, we have to understand that AI is a fantastic tool, but we have to give people the understanding, the digital literacy, if you like, in terms of understanding how to do that.
Thanks. Thanks, Tim. That's great. And I love that quote. It's the humans that need fixing. That's a future panel coming. Yeah, I love that. I might have to steal that, Tim, if you don't mind. And it's a great way of bringing our session to a close in terms of thinking about how we increase people's understanding. How do we help people to really understand the awesome potential of these technologies? And then, if I may say, be brave in the looking at the opportunities, taking, you know, trying these technologies out and seeing what it can do to transform organizations and our society. It's a really exciting time, and I just want to say thank you to Sana, Tim, and Sean for walking us through where you think we are right now, but also the potential, right? I hope you all feel as optimistic as our panel and myself, because does feel like a really exciting time to be in these areas, to be in data, to be in emerging technology, to be in AI in the UK. And we've got a great roadmap for how we move forward. Now it's just making it happen, right? So we're here to help with that and to work with yourself, Tim, of course, and your colleagues, House Lords, Sean in industry, and Sana in the Office for AI and Government to make that happen. So more to come, more discussion to come.